Hi everyone, welcome to the channel. So today we're gonna talk about a writer's nightmare, which is when you get close to finishing your first draft, or maybe you're there and the picture you had in mind at the start is not the one that you want now, because it's not what is working, it's not what is gonna crack this book open for you. And so basically you have to make huge structural changes, and this scares you because it's gonna set you back 1 or 2 years of work. So I've been there and I've done it myself, and I can tell you that it's worth it and you should do it too. My name is Roberta. I am a writer currently working on a contemporary fiction novel, and I have just started my second draft, which was the perfect time for me to reflect back about the process, the journey, and what especially the changes I made from one version to the next. And so we're gonna call my novel Project East, because I'm writing it here in the East Village, and also East is somewhat relevant to the topic. Of course, this is not the real title, but we will use this code name. Let's grab pen and paper and let's see what the difference are. Spoilers alert, there is actually a secret draft, which was the very first draft of this book that I wrote 4 years back. So we'll call that draft 0, and I will tell you how that changed, and you will see that basically that draft 0 with the second draft that I have in mind and that I'm going to start writing now has very little in common. So the first thing is a very important aspect, and is characters. So my draft 0 it was very much of a choral novel. It had many characters, and by the end of it I realized that this made the book confusing, unfocused. You couldn't really tell what the main story was about, what was my message, what I wanted to get out of it. So when I switched from draft 0 to draft 1, I basically axed 3/4 of the characters. The second change, which is very much connected to that, is the number of protagonists. So in my draft 0 I had 4 protagonists, and each of them had a co-lead, and so again, big number of characters, big confusion. So for me this was too much, and I axed it, and now in draft 1 I have 1 protagonist left with 1 co-protagonist, and this is the character who had the main story, who I really actually wanted to write about, and everyone else was just creating noise. The third change connected to all of this was changing the point of view. So in my draft 0 I wrote it in third person because I needed this zoom out vision to move from one character to the next and connect all of them in the same scene. However, when I switched to draft 1, I wanted to zoom in this protagonist. It was really her point of view, it was her story, and so I decided to move the point of view to first person, so we are really inside her head all the time. So as you can imagine, this means that basically draft 0 and draft 1 are completely different books, and this is why they are 2 years apart. This is how long it took me to basically rewrite the whole thing, and I know this may sound scary, but honestly it's worth it, because the draft 0 just simply couldn't work. Okay, now we go to the changes between draft 1 and draft 2 that I'm working on at the moment. So the first thing is that draft 1 had a division in parts. There was a part 1 with chapters, part 2 chapters, part 3 chapters. I realized after finishing that actually the division in parts was useful to me as the writer, to set the pace of the novel, see where the main turning points were, and sort of just catalogize the content where I wanted to put it. But honestly, for the reader, it made absolutely no difference. This division in parts had no role whatsoever to the reader's experience, and that's when I realized that actually I needed to get rid of it, because it could be confusing and simply it had no value. It was useful just during the writing process. The second change is also similar, I guess. Draft 1 had a prologue and an epilogue. While I finished it and I was rereading it, I realized that actually these were 2 like North Stars that were useful for me while writing, so that everything I wrote, the main story, the sub-stories would be drawn from that starting point that was the prologue to the ending. And I actually wrote these 2 parts right at the start, so it was really for me to guide me through it. But then when I finished and I was rereading it, I realized that actually the reader doesn't need them, but even worse than that, they are detrimental to the reader's experience, because the prologue gave away too much, because it was some sort of a flashback the character was having, and then the epilogue was also giving too much, because actually it was better to leave some things in the end left to the reader's imagination and not give everything away. Okay, so this is where I am at the moment, basically, and as you can see, a lot of changes. The first set of changes we discussed, those took a lot of time. Those were big structural changes that basically required me to rewrite the whole thing. The last set was a reflection of, the structures that we impose on our novel and that are actually more useful to us as the writers rather than to the reader for their reading experience. And finally, there is a bonus one that I wanted to mention. I was actually thinking, when moving from draft 1 to draft 2, to change the tense. So I wrote the draft 1 in past tense, and I was thinking of actually rewriting the whole thing in draft 2 in present tense. And this is because somehow I got it into my head that present tense was more modern for books, more contemporary, and maybe there would be more demand, but ultimately I decided to scrap that idea, because actually I like the fact that it's written in a past tense. I think it gives more of this narrative flow, and that's how I wanted to keep it. So this change is just a bonus one. I reflected on it, but I won't act on it. So this is what I wanted to tell you today, and the message I really want to convey is that if you feel deep inside that a big structural change is needed, that something is wrong with your characters, you didn't actually choose the right protagonist, you focus your story on one character when actually the main story laid with another character, and this happens in books all the time, take the time, take the extra year to rewrite it, because you will be grateful for it. Otherwise the book may work, but it won't be the best version that you have in mind and that you actually want. So thank you so much for watching, and if you like to follow my writing journey and help me finish the second draft, you can watch my latest video here on the screen, and ciao!